And with that, we can get started with today's theory lesson. I told you that for the upcoming samples, today's sample, maybe also next week's exam, we need one little piece of information about entity framework, which we haven't talked about yet. And this piece of information is called the delete actions. I would like to demo these delete actions. Please watch closely because it's a really important topic. It's not that difficult. You will definitely immediately understand it, but it's really important if you want to build non-trivial applications with entity framework. Let's take this example. This example is a console app. If I run it, it currently does nothing. And let's add two very simple entities to this demo, and then we will play a little bit with these entities, and I will show you what delete actions really are and how you can configure them with entity framework. This sample, as you can see it here, is really trivial. It contains just one demo context. It's currently empty, so no tables yet. And it just creates the factory. It has no migrations in it, so it's really a starter project for me in order to have the possibility to demo these delete actions for you. Let's add a public class, and let's start with an order header class. The order header is a German Bestellkopf, so it's a header row for every order that we get from a customer, for instance. Let's, of course, add an ID property. By the way, you do not need to follow along. It's more important for me that you watch now my demo and try to understand what I show you. You will have the possibility to try that on your own in the exam today. So now it's more important that you watch, ask questions if you have questions, and try to understand the concepts. That's the important thing here, okay? So you don't need to type in. Well, if you want, you can. Okay, we have an order header and add another string description. It doesn't matter what we add for properties here. Let's stick with these two, that's fine. Then we add another public class here. Let's call it order detail. If you place an order at a shop like Amazon, for instance, the order header is your order, and the order details would be all the products that you order. Maybe a book, maybe a cable for your computer, or whatever you order. So again, we have an ID property, auto-generated ID. You know that by now. Then we add a string property, which is the product that we order. And then we add an integer property, which is the quantity that we order. Very, very simple entities, just these two. But now comes the important thing. We want to have relations. Delete actions are all about relations. In this case, we have a one-to-many relationship. For one order header, we have multiple order details. For one order detail, we have exactly one order header. Therefore, we have to design the relation properties like that. Property, order header. This is the header. Let's call it order header. It's better like that. And the second property is their order header ID. That is the database foreign key column. That is the foreign key order header ID, which is needed for the relation. This is the property with which we can navigate from the order detail to the corresponding order header. On the other side, we create a property of type list of order detail, and that is our order details. Something like this. Yeah, okay, because we need a list, because for one order header we have multiple order details. Shouldn't be too complicated. By now, from all the samples that we did so far, you should be familiar with setting these kind of relation properties. Any questions regarding that? Okay, I didn't assume that because we did that so often. Let's add the DB set properties. Order header, order headers, and the second one, DB set order detail, order details. Now we have our database, let's say tables, in this case just our DB sets, which refer to the modal classes up here, and that looks good. I think we should be all set. So with this, we go into the command line and try a .NET EF migrations add initial migrations. Let's see if everything works out nicely. Yes, it did. Now we have our migrations. Let's try to update the database. .NET EF database update. Let's see. I added the necessary statements, configurations in order to see all the SQL statement. It looks really good. If we take a look at the Azure Data Studio here, and I open up my database, here is the, where is it? Delete actions demo. Then you see we have here our order details and our order headers. From the order details, we have the order header ID, and both tables are currently empty. That looks pretty good. So now we can add some data. Okay, let's add some data. Let's create a order header, var header equals to new order header, and let's specify the description. This is foo bar, nothing special, and that's it. Good. Let's add detail 1, new order detail. We specify the product, which is foo, and we buy a quantity, a quantity of 1, and the header is the header. That looks good. And then let's specify a detail 2, which is here a foo bar, and quantities 2, everything is fine. Then we go into the context, get our order details, and add the detail 1. And we also add, of course, the detail 1 and the detail 2. And finally we say save changes async, and because it's async, remember, important thing, wait. And if you want to use a wait, we use async and task. I'm pretty fast here because this is essentially nothing new. You should already be familiar with the things that I do here from our exercises in the last few weeks. If you have any questions, don't hesitate. This is not an exam. You can ask questions even if we have already covered the material already. I will not be angry. Absolutely not. It's way more important that you really understand what we are doing. So don't hesitate if you have questions to ask your questions, okay? I will run the app. Let's see if I screwed up or if everything works out nicely. It looks good. If we scroll up, you see we have an insert into order headers. Then we have an insert into order details. And we should have a second insert into order details. Everything is fine. If we go here into our order details and we do a select statement, then you see it looks really good. We have foo, we have bar, and we have the foreign key relation to the order header. So if I take a look at the order header, everything is okay. This is our order header. Good. Nothing special so far. Now we go into the new topic, because now I will, let's clean up the database again. Let me see. Delete from order details, delete from order headers, something like this. Let's remove all the data so we have a clean database. And now I'm going to do the following. I will say await context dot order headers, remove the header. Now this one, remove async, of course. Remove? No. Await, I'm sorry. Await context.save changes async. Of course, we don't have an async remove. We need to issue the database statement with the save changes async. So please try to follow me, okay? What we have here is really a big problem, because we are removing the order header. But the problem is that the details are referring to this order header. These two details, they are referring to this order header up here. So if we remove this order header, we really have a problem down here. Typically, if you do that in a relational database, we would get an error. We would get an error that we cannot delete the order header because some foreign key relations refer to this order header. Let's check what's going on with Entity Framework if we do exactly that. I will run the application again. And the first thing that we note is it doesn't crash. It simply doesn't crash. It works. But the interesting thing is that we get, as you can see here, see that one? We have additional statements. Let's check what's going on in the database. Let's take a look at the order headers. We shouldn't have any rows, right? Yes, but how did it work? What happened to the order details? Oh, they are gone too. But we never deleted the order details, did we? We just removed the order header. Why did the order details disappear? Well, this is Entity Framework magic. This is what Entity Framework does. This is what so-called delete actions are. We can tell Entity Framework that it should maintain the dependent rows in other tables for us. That's the important thing. We don't get an error from the database. This is what delete actions are all about. Of course, we can define exactly what we want Entity Framework to do in such cases. And this is where we can define the so-called delete behavior of our delete actions. And I will show you that in a second. But before we go into that, did everybody understand what I showed you here and why this is important and what Entity Framework did behind the scenes? So the takeaway is, if you delete a master record, Entity Framework will try to make sure that all the dependent records from this master or main record are handled properly. And I will tell you about the possible strategies in a second. Good. So how can we configure the details about how Entity Framework manages these delete actions? In the database context, you see it here, we can override a method which gives us the possibility to configure details about the structure of our database. So we say override on modal creating. I'm sorry. The on modal creating method gives us a so-called modal builder. This modal builder allows us to configure our data models in great details. What we can do with this modal builder is, first, we can do everything that we can also do with data annotations. So for instance, if I go here and I add a required here, see that one? I could do exactly the same thing here. You know the required attribute, don't you? From last lessons, I hope you do. We could say modal builder.entity. This is now the entity order detail. And here you have a lot of methods where we can configure our data model. In this case, we can start with the property. We can specify the property, in this case product, and then we can specify that this thing is required. You see this line? This line would be, this line here is an alternative to this attribute. Both things do exactly the same. It is just a matter of your personal preference. Do you like these attributes or do you like this kind of programming here? It's called the so-called Fluent API. You can do exactly the same. So this is where you can choose whether you want to do that one or whether you want to do that one. I personally, for simple examples, prefer the data annotation attributes up here. I do not type the code in on modal creating. However, in more complex applications, in real-world applications, I typically prefer this one down here. But we are here at a beginner's course, so therefore this one is perfectly fine. But if you prefer this one down here, it's perfectly fine for me too. You can really choose. So the thing is that there are some things in entity frameworks that you cannot define in form of attributes. So, and delete actions is one of them. I cannot just go here and type with an annotation up here, with an attribute here, what the delete action should be. It's simply not possible. There are implementations, open source implementations, but out of the box, Entity Framework does not support this. If you want to influence the delete strategy, you have to do it in on-model creating. And I would like to show you how this is done here. Let's say model builder, model builder, entity, and we start with what do we start? We start with the order header. Good. This order header has many, of course, the order detail has many. This one has many. The header has many order details. See it here? And this one, the order detail, has exactly one order header. It has a foreign key. The details. IntelliSense is not doing what I want. The order header ID. And now comes the important part. You see, these are not new for you. You already know that. Order header has many order details. An order detail has exactly one order header. And there is a foreign key column, the ID, the integer value, which should be filled by Entity Framework. But now comes the important part. On delete. With the on delete, we can define what Entity Framework should do when it comes to the database and deleting main records and what it should do to dependent records. There are multiple things which you can do. You see, there is a cascade. I will not go into the details between client cascade and client set null and set null. I will just focus on the main parts here, okay? If you want to know all the details about all the different possibilities, please check the documentation. Cascade is the first option that we have, and you saw cascade a minute ago. Cascading means if you delete the order header, all the dependent order details are deleted too. That is what cascade means. It cascades the delete if it can. Set null would mean that if we delete the order header, the foreign key in the dependent table is set to null, if possible. Okay? And finally, we can also tell Entity Framework no action. That means Entity Framework, don't care about it, just try to delete the records that I tell you. If there will be a database error, that's fine for me. Okay? And this is the thing that I would like to show you. How can we get rid of Entity Framework in the first place and say, hey, don't cascade, don't set null. I don't want to have this magic of Entity Framework. I would like to have this one. I would like to say to Entity Framework, you know what, that's not your job. That will be done by the database. And if the database has a problem, that's fine. You can throw an exception in those cases. So what we do is we essentially say no action. See? This is how we can configure that delete behavior of our Entity Framework relation. Good? Good. Let's try that. Let's build it. Ah, it worked. Let's go here. Let's add migrations, just to be sure. Let's update the database. It will not update something in the database. I'm just making sure it does. Okay, that's fine. And now let's clean up the database. I'm not sure if we have some data here in the, no, the tables are empty. That's good. And let's run our application again. Okay, boom. And now we get an exception. And this is exactly the exception that I would like to show you. Because now we cannot remove the header anymore. It's not possible. If we now try to remove the header, I can go here to the output. It's trying to do the delete statement. It should be somewhere below. We will see it later on once the exception is done. It's trying to do the delete statement, but the delete statement does not work. Because if we try to delete the header, the details are still there, and therefore the database complains. I can show you that in the database too. See, here we have our two data items in the details. If we take a look at the header, here we have one order header with the ID 3. If I try to go into the database here and say delete from order header where ID equals to, I think it was 3, right? It was 3, something like this. If I run it, it will tell me that it's not possible because we are violating a foreign key constraint. And this is exactly the error that we expect from the database. Before, without the thing that I've shown you now, Entity Framework made sure that everything is fine. And it did the cascade delete for us. It deleted the dependent records. Good, let me show this code again. This one was the important thing. Questions so far? You might ask yourself, why? Why should I do that? Entity Framework is smart. Entity Framework helps me dealing with this problem. If I delete the master record, all the dependent records should be deleted too, shouldn't they? Well, in the example that you have to solve today, and maybe also next week in the exam, I don't know yet, I haven't written the exam for next week already, there are situations where Entity Framework simply can't deal with a problem. For instance, you could have something like this. You could have one table, you could have a second table, and you could have multiple relations between these tables, something like this. Imagine that in the order header record, we have multiple relations to a customer. We have the customer who ordered, and we have the customer who receives the invoice. In such situation, Entity Framework has a problem, because when it deletes one record here, this would cascade down to some deletes here, and these deletes here might also cascade to again deletes here, and this will again lead to deletes here. It is a kind of cycle that we have here. Sometimes Entity Framework says, hey, I have a cycle, I have a problem, I cannot resolve this for you. In such cases, you must absolutely change the delete behavior, otherwise you cannot use Entity Framework, and that is definitely not a thing you want to do. So, for beginners like you are, the rule of thumb could be, try to stick with the default behavior as long as you can. If you want to change the default behavior, you can. But sometimes Entity Framework will complain. Sometimes Entity Framework will complain and tell you, I'm very sorry, I cannot handle this complex data model doing cascade deletes or something like this. You have to set the delete behavior to no action. And in the example today that you have to work on today, you have exactly that scenario. And in such cases, you have to add this line for each relation between the two tables. So if you have multiple relations, you have multiple instances of this line. Okay? You will have the possibility to try that in your exercise today. And with that, I would like to introduce you for another few minutes to the exercise, and then you have your own time. I told you approximately until 9 we will work, and then you have the possibility to try it on your own. This is the exercise that you have to do today. This exercise is similar from the size and complexity to what you could expect maybe next week in the real exam. Maybe, depending on what I see today, maybe it will be a little bit shorter, but it's fine. It will be approximately in this ballpark, okay? So what do we have here? In this scenario, you are in a local tennis club. In your tennis club, you have exactly 32 active members. And these active members in your tennis club, they want to do a club championship. And in this club championship, they have decided to play in this based on these rules. So in the round 1, you have 16 matches between each 2 players, and the winner will get to the next round. So in the next round, you have 8 matches. In the next round, you have 4 matches. In the next round, you have 2 matches. And finally, in the 5th round, you only have 1 match where 2 players play against each other, and the winner will be the club champion of this year. It's your job to build a software, an API, with which you can manage this tournament, this club championship. Now, what do we have to do? First, you have to do the data model. Okay, take a look at the requirements. I'm pretty sure you will understand them. In order to get you started, I have created a starter solution for you. It's here. It's part of your requirements. It's here. And in this starter solution, it will also be part of your GitHub Classroom. You have a lot of code already in. It is a ready-made ASP.NET Core application. It already contains some data here, match and player and things like that. And yeah, that's already here. Okay, so it's empty. The database context is nearly empty. You see, it's just a constructor and a lot of methods where you have thrown new not implemented exceptions. So it's not implemented yet. So what do we have to do? I forgot to mention something. The starter code contains a lot of automated tests. So you can check whether your code works by running the tests. They are at the beginning nearly all red, and they should become green. Okay, just open it, run the tests, and you will see how far you went. The requirements are structured in 2 parts. You have minimum requirements. This is the absolute minimum that you have to create, that you have to implement. The code has to compile without errors, and these things have to work in order to get a positive grade. That should not be a problem. That must not be a problem for all of you. It's really simple. It's just an insert. It's an insert with very simple relations. It's an update. It's a very simple link query, and it is a delete. And you also have to create one web API endpoint, which consists of a single line of code. That's the absolute minimum that you have to be able to build. Okay? If you want to have more than just a positive grade, you have to fulfill additional requirements. Okay? Now you have to create a filtered player method. Take a look at it. You have to generate match records. Please take a look at the requirements. You have to use transactions. It's very simple. And you have to add a bunch of web APIs. It shouldn't be complex. I think in total you have to write 40 or 50 lines of code, nothing more, something like this. And that's it. That's the example. Okay? I already gave you the link to the GitHub Classroom. I will not show that here because I'm recording that on video, and that's not for somebody else outside of this class. If anybody is watching this video who is not in your class, of course you can do this example, just get it from this repository. You, students, you don't have to get it from this repository. You have a GitHub Classroom link, which you already got through the Discord server. So it's now 9 o'clock. I would say if you want to see where you are standing in terms of preparation for your exam next week, then I would say you should be able to solve this example at least to a certain degree. You don't have to solve everything if you don't want to have 1 on your exam, but you should at least solve the minimum requirements and possibly some additional requirements too within the next 2.5 hours, 2.5 or 3 hours. Okay? I would suggest that you spend the next 2 hours working on this exercise, and after approximately 2 hours, approximately at 11 o'clock, I will check in the sample solution here in this folder. It's already done, so I will just add it. From then on, you have another hour to take a look at how I implemented this requirements, okay? And we will meet again at 12 here in this Teams room, okay? And at 12, we will spend a little bit of time, and you can bring all your questions, and maybe we talk about your experiences, whether it was complex or whether it was really simple. And until that time, I will be available through Discord. So if you have questions, if you don't understand the delete actions that I showed you today, then don't hesitate. Contact me, send me a quick note on Discord, and we can immediately meet either in Discord or Team, wherever you want, and I can help you overcome any problems. Do you have any additional questions? Okay, I will be here for you. If you have any questions, just contact me. With that, we close the lesson here in this Teams channel. I will leave the Teams channel, but I will stay available in Discord the whole time. And please note it down, at 12 we will meet again here in this Teams channel and talk about your experiences, questions, and so on.